You're ready? I'm ready. All right. We've been speaking a lot about parallels throughout this class, and we're going to use that as a run into what we're doing now. Early in the talks, we talked about parallels, reflective parallels between our personal existence and our transcendental existence. We talked about the physical body being a reflection of the divine spirit and how the resistance of matter built the capability of will of the divine spirit. And we talked about how the vital body, with its idea of growth and vitality, was a reflection of the plastic, ever-moving state of life spirit, the divine imagination. And we talked about how the desire body was a reflection of the self, because in the animal-like desire state we become separate and autonomous, and we can move about on our own, and that motivation and separation from everything leads to a self-consciousness, how that was related to the human spirit or the higher self or the focus of the individuality. That was some of the first parallels we talked about. We talked about this eventually being something where experience in the form gets reflected back into the spirit, and impulses from the spirit get reflected back into the form. Lately, we've been talking about the relationship or the parallel between the macrocosm of nature and the human microcosm. We said that conditions in the physical nature of the earth were matched by conditions in human evolution, which is not a difficult concept to accept. We always adapt to what conditions are, such that if it were always dark and dreary, we'd develop. Like there are fish that live in caves, in the water in caves that have no eyes. They don't see at all, and they adapt to those kinds of conditions. But what we have found is that we are a creative part of the development of the microcosm, and that is an increasingly bidirectional parallel, that changes in our consciousness cause changes in nature, and that changes in nature cause changes in our form and changes in our consciousness. This is also bidirectional, and like the first parallel, it is not immediate. There's still a breach, or there's still a separation, except in very rare cases where people do have magical abilities, and with these magical abilities they can change a certain small amount of nature directly and immediately. So there is also then the tension of this kind of parallelism. Also, we've been talking all along about the relationship between the evolution of form in the earth and of form in the human body, in macrocosm and microcosm, and the parallelism between that and our consciousness and our moral nature. We talked a lot in Lemuria about, when we were talking about Lemuria, how our beginning of sensation of external feeling led to a moral consciousness that what was good for us or what we desired was that which gave us sensation. And all of our evolutionary activity was directed to sensation. So there's a parallelism between moral development and consciousness development and physical development at the same time. Finally, in Lemuria, we began talking about a fundamental difference between the doer and the deed. That when we do something, that we become self-conscious of ourselves as doers. And that this makes for a differentiation of the agent and the action. Now, we also talked about the object of the action, but that's not necessary to go into now. Probably this kind of differentiation between the doer and the deed is still a large part of our evolution, especially if we are spiritual seekers, and we try to do something like concentration, where we try in our concentration to develop a thought form, an imagination where we picture something, either something that we would normally see with our physical eyes, or a soul picture that we would see inwardly with the eye of our soul, and we focus all of our attention on the development of that thought form to the exclusion of everything else. We focus on that, and in the process of developing that thought form, what happens is the power of will that is necessary to do that becomes greatly activated, and the entire threefold spiritual ego, the selfhood, is awakened by that. And the big thing that happens is, in the process of thinking, we become aware of who the thinker is. And there's some kind of an objectification. And so there is a separation. We saw this in Lemurian times. We saw that this took place with another differentiation. That is the differentiation between male bodies and female bodies. And by living alternately in male and female bodies, we got two very different experiences. And that living in these bodies, we had different, because of the polarization being different in the two of them. It's like when our consciousness was divided, it was necessary to divide with the polarization to be total. Otherwise, there would be no reason for there to be any division at all. If we all divided into being males, or if we all, which was impossible to continue the species, or if we all divided into all females, there would be no purpose for the division. But we talked about attention, that from looking from the 2 points of view, the male point of view and the female point of view, that this led to a greater identification of selfhood. And we mentioned that in the union of the two poles, the male and the female, and a consequent birth that came out of that, it was very much like the transcendent experience of the will of the divine spirit working together with the imagination of the life spirit to produce the birth of selfhood. And that this tension was again paralleled between the experiential world, where we experience things externally, and the spiritual worlds internally, where we understand things. And so that's what we've been talking about. We've been talking about tension between the divided state of our being. So let's do a little bit closer review of the same thing to work down to where we're getting now, and then we'll relate it to our topic of tonight, which is a little less sensitive than the topic of last time. Okay, the first thing that was necessary and is necessary in all evolution is experience. And so the first thing we did was develop a vehicle of physical experience. it was not possible to develop anything from us or within ourselves without experience. And the most rudimentary experience was the mineral-like experience, and it helped us to understand form. Then a little bit further in time, we unfolded the reflected divine spirit. But simple experience, not extended in time or in life, was inadequate. That experience had to have a quality about it that it didn't merely endure, but that it grew and that it progressed. That a form didn't stay the same, but that it went through some sort of metamorphosis. Even a cyclical metamorphosis was better than something that stayed the same. And so we developed a vital experience. And from that kind of living, that kind of growing, that kind of becoming, we were able to not just have a force of will in enduring just by existing, but we were able to unfold an understanding in the spirit of a perpetual, ongoing life that has a continued purpose. The plant, as we see, as long as the plant is alive, it grows. And its purpose is light. It always grows toward light, and it always develops towards light. And with the life spirit, we understood in our imagination, we understood purpose. Or we had the potentiality of understanding purpose. That is, but the purpose, again, this was eternal, as all things in the Spirit are eternal. They go on forever and ever. And the purpose is within the raw experience. And so when we say that we have an understanding of life, or we know what the experience of life is like in the Spirit, it's something that's internal. You can't set it outside of everything else and say this is life, any more than you can take the vitality out of a plant and say this is living vitality. The life is only understood in the growing, and the vitality is only understood in the growing, and it's only understood in the living, and life is understood within the ongoing process or means of continuance. And finally, we had a motive experience. We experienced something, we recognized, we separated ourselves, our forms. And when we separated our forms, there became experientially a realization that our separate forms were separate from the total macrocosm. And that recognition of separation made us want things. That is, when we say somebody is wanting in something, it isn't complete because it's now separated from the whole, and when it's separated from the whole, it wants something. And that wanting became motive. It drove us to experience the wanting of things. It caused us to move about and seek those things out. And that brought about, in a little bit later period in time, the human spirit. Which is associated with separative selfhood. Okay, all of these three things together are roughly called the individuality, or sometimes a threefold spirit. It's individuality because despite the fact that we all partake of the divine will, because when you're talking about spirit, it's not like bodies, where you can say, like your business ends where my nose begins, and where we each have a separate body, we can interpenetrate desire bodies and things like that, but we still have separate desire bodies. In the realms of spirit, we are part of the macrocosm. All, like our life spirit is the same of the life spirit that is Christ. But despite the fact that we have identity with the macrocosm, because each of our experiences has been unique, and it continues to become more and more unique, it's an individuality. So much so that our spiritual consciousness is as different as the sum total of the difference of all of our phenomenal material kinds of experiences. This, obviously, is called the personality. So, we have this compound tension. Because even though it was the formal experience that waked up within us the divine spirit, we had the potential of the divine spirit was in the cosmos even before we had the material experience. That is to say, the divine spirit that was within the great divinities that we talked about before, very early on in this series of talks, when we talked about the Lords of the Flame, that awakened in us a divine spirit. That existed in the cosmos even antecedent to all of this in terms of a linear kind of time. And so in a way, there is a twofold tension that the divine spirit was intended even before we were given this experience. And that this divine spirit is what existed before the material experience existed, though not as it does with individuals. It existed in the cosmic hierarchies. So we have a tension where the threefold spirit, which has existed from the very early, from before it existed in the cosmos, before it existed in us, is reflected in these different modes of experience, and it is drawing together with the material experience, and so there's an intention, there is a tension there. It's as though the divine spirit wants to unite with its material experience. And it's as though the life spirit wants to unite with the vital nature, with life. And it's as though the human spirit wants to unite with the motive forces. So there is a reflection, and there is also in the tension. So we've talked about two kinds of tension. One where they're just trying to draw together, one where they're trying to be drawn together by a reflective purpose, and another kind of tension that there is, since this is all focused through a lens of the cosmic mind, that there is an inversion. And in this inversion, the spirit, as it begins to operate on its own reflective vehicles, causes them to go into decadence. So there is a thing that there is a tension between the spirit and the body, that when the spirit functions in the body and drives it, it causes it to break down. So there's a compound tension in that. Okay. Plus there's also a tension, or there's also a struggle between the body and the spirit that works in such a way that the personality has developed a character of its own. The second self, or the lower self, or the personal self, has developed a nature that it doesn't even recognize the divine self, and it even sets itself up as the divine member, because it is a reflection of the divine member, and it gets things upside down and backwards, and so there's a tension of the personality trying to pull away from divine intent. It's almost like the Bible says, or like Paul says in the Bible, that which I would I do not, but that which I would not, that do I. And there's an internal struggle between the self, which is in spirit, and this personality, which is inverted, and it just wants to serve itself and even pull away from the divine purpose. Okay. Now, even though there is some of the pull away, we can look at the tension between the individuality and the personality like a cosmic courtship. Like there is something that the personality cannot exist without the meaningfulness of the spirit. And the spirit, in order to be fulfilled as a creative being, must have the personality. So they need each other. And there is a drawing together, and it is like a divine courtship between the first and second selves. And it goes like a courtship because as much as the two are drawn together, they repel each other. The spirit is repelled by the grossness of the personality, and the personality is repelled by the need for sacrifice that comes from the spirit. And so it's like a courtship that you're drawn together and pushed apart at the same time. And again, we have this procreational model. In fact, it goes much further, that when one gets into the practices that unite the individuality and the personality in spiritual practices, it becomes like the procreative act on a supreme level, such that the procreative act is almost a joke in comparison. And so there is this great parallel then between the tension and attraction of the individuality and personality that is much like a courtship. Now there's one problem with this kind of diagram. This kind of diagram is parallel and it is stratified. Yes, it's true that our physical experience is limited to a very small amount of the physical world, and it is true that our vital body sticks out from our physical body. Even when it's in the physical body, it extends beyond it. And the same thing, that the aura extends out much further, and it can be driven to extend long distances. And the divine spirit is almost synonymous with interstellar space, the life spirit with interplanetary space in its extensiveness. So you can say that in a stratified, that there is a stratified parallelism, but that's not the real reality. The real reality we know from our inner experiences is that the spiritual vehicles, as we proceed inward, are interpenetrating. That in any given, at any given place in space, there could be somebody in the desire world right now, right in front of my face, mocking me. And it wouldn't be totally out of place, because when you get overly serious, that mockery exists. In fact, there could be somebody interpenetrating my physical being from the inner spiritual worlds. So there's a quality of interpenetration. But it's not just an interpenetration of space of different orders, not even three-dimensional space with higher rarity bodies, but it is an interpenetration that there is a withinness. That when something, for example, when the vital body interpenetrates the physical, it isn't just floating in it like a cloud floating through it. It is actually within the core of each atom of it. And with that withinness, you might say that the physical body is suspended within the vital body. And that if you go within yourself, you would see that this is more of a suspension within inner space, of a form of existence that, even though it is less evolved than the physical, is rarer, and by externalizing or hardening itself out is the way that the physical is born in the first place. But this withinness has a quality of like behindness. I don't know how to say that, but it's like when you hold your consciousness on something, you see that within and behind it is another state of being, and that other state of being has another meaning. And so all of the different realms that we exist on are interpenetrating, and they are within each other, and they're seeking something like a concentricity, such that the focus of the will, that is our focus of the will, of the divine spirit that is itself interstellar in its extent, that it is exactly within the life spirit, the human spirit, the desire body, the etheric vital body, and the physical body, so that they're all within to one end. This is the type of union that is being sought. So that it's not like we have a transcendental experience and we're out and away from anything somatic at all, or that we are having a great physical experience and we're not experiencing the meaning of life with a capital L. It's sort of like that. What we're seeking is to have them all working all together to one purpose. We're seeking a complete divine unity. And so the tension and the union that is being brought about by this long, slow, gradual evolution that takes millions of years is of that order. Okay. Now, all along, last week we talked about a very, very hard issue to talk about. We talked about evolutions of forms and different kinds of forms. And it's really unfair to the people who are coming in, because we're going to be using words that can be very much misunderstood. And I don't want them to be misunderstood, because I spent hours last week trying to be very careful about how I use the words. We talked last week about forms that we all go through and that we pass through, something like the way we work on a garden. First we use a spade to break up the soil, and we use another tool to make it smaller, and then we use a rake to clean it up, and eventually we use something to plant the seeds, and eventually a hoe, and that these forms of experience in the times of Lemuria and Atlantis, and in a vague way in our times, are called races. Difficult thing to talk about because most people get attached to the forms and not to the life and to the experiences that we get through them. Now, we left off talking in Lemuria and we left off talking in Atlantis about this tension. You know, in ourselves we have it I have it all the time in my life, that no matter, and I don't think I'm unique or different from anybody else at all, that no matter how much experience I have in the physical world, there is a kind of loneliness. There is like a tension and there's an expectancy. It's like any day there's going to be a great cosmic event that takes place, and I'm going to feel at home, and I'm going to know what it's all about. And that tension is what we're talking about, the tension between and going the other way. Any day, I think, all of these insights that I get from a transcendental sense, any day now I'm going to be able to bring it out right and manifest it artistically in the material world. That one seems a little bit more difficult to accomplish than to go the other way around, to take the experiences of the daily external experiential worlds and bring them into spiritual consciousness. And this tension in evolving humanity, as we evolve from the far past, especially in the recent past that we're talking about, Lemuria and Atlantis, this tension between the spiritual consciousness vehicles and the material experiential vehicles, this force that tries to bring the two of them together is called religion. Religion is this part of it. The suffix is merely a word designator, but the root word is the same as the word as, again, the suffix tells us to state that it's in a nominal state. And when we have ligaments that tie our muscles to our bones, it's something that ties something together. And so our religion is a re-tying together of something. It is a vehicle for that kind of tying together. Now this works in a number of different ways. Religion or reunion means a return or retying together to a harmonious participation within ourselves and within the cosmos that has been broken up since what we described in the early Lemuria lectures as the fall of humanity. When we willfully asserted ourselves to work against the cosmic plan, we interjected a divine discord. It gave us freedom. It also caused us a lot of pain and suffering because we were working against the whole cosmos and for ourselves alone. And to this day, it's very obvious that most of our suffering comes from working for ourselves alone and working against the cosmos. And since we are part of the cosmos, it's an impossibility to do that very thing. We're causing ourselves all kinds of torturous suffering. And so, in some ways, the word religion means a reconnection with the whole divine plan, the whole cosmic archetype. It means a reunion, or being reconnected with the whole past pathway. We said a long, long time ago that if we were to describe the primordial atom the egg of the cosmos, we said we would describe it as, the best three-dimensional would be a bunch of lemniscat spirals. That would look something like that. And that there is a way, that's a very poor drawing of it. There are people that have made very elaborate drawings of it and tied it together with all of the things we were talking about with great intricacy. And so there is this whole way, as the Taoists would talk about it, that is a divine path, that is part of the whole archetypal consciousness. And so on one level, we're trying to reunite with cosmic harmony. On another level, we're trying to reunite with the archetypal plan, the archetypal purpose. On another level, we're trying to just plain unite with what is us. But on a much, much more profound level, the re part of religion is extremely important. We talked a long time ago, all of you have certainly forgotten it by now, some of you haven't been here. We said that at the beginning of the whole cosmos, billions of years ago, when matter didn't exist, the cosmic ethers didn't exist, the desire world didn't exist, even the world of thought didn't exist, none of this existed, but that it came into being as it was needed. That before all of this, in the very beginning, there was what is called the state of existence, or the realm of existence, that is called roughly the world of God. And that within that there were potential foci of that were called virgin spirits. And that is the void part of ourselves that has existed all the way from the beginning, and that within the threefold spirit, that virgin spirit is a silent watcher. It remains virgin, though it is changed through the whole of experience. It's almost an unspeakable. And the reunion that we're talking about in religion is a reconnection with that by bringing it into play by the concentricity of all of the forms of experience and all of the powers of the Spirit that we have garnered to ourselves in the whole of evolution. In all of the billions of years when we were talking about all of the different gods projecting different kinds of experience to us, the reunion of both the second self, the personal self, and the higher spiritual self with each other, but as well with the virgin spirit, is what is behind the reunion of union. Okay. So, to briefly review, religion is then for bringing about this interpenetrating, this within this behindness, where all of the levels and states of existence that we are on are seen within a oneness. And within that oneness, almost completely transparently, we exist. We can manifest through it, but not necessarily with the push of egoism that we normally have. So this is the goal of religion. Everything is to be made concentric. And then everything is to be found in everything else. And everything is to be expressed in everything else. Religion is only, like when the immediate goal of religion is accomplished, religion will no longer be necessary because there won't be a union to be consummated. But that's only the beginning. That is when why we exist or why we developed in the first place gets set into motion. It's true that when we were mineral-like, we served in the same way that these minerals give us form. And it's true that when we were plant-like, we provided life in the same way that our plants provide life, vitality, all of those things. But only when the divine union has taken place where we're all centered and concentric, that then we can do what we were meant to do in terms of our true creativity. All along, we have been leading up to this. All along, we have been creatures. Everything that we are, even in spirit, is a consequence of what the gods have made of us. They gave of themselves, and they poured into being this experiential totality that is called a human. And when that all comes together, and the individual virgin spirit is born within that as a divine being, it gives all of that back to the cosmos, and it becomes a divine creator in its own. And that process can only take place, the giving back, or if you like, the throwing off and the destroying, in the sense of the decadence from the resistance that is produced by all the phenomenal bodies. That is when our real work begins. We've been served all along, and now it's our time to serve when this takes place. And so that is the end of religion. This is why Christ says it is better to give than it is to receive. He doesn't mean to destroy the balance of karma of giving and receiving, but we've got an awfully big backload of receiving without giving. And now we are to become creative beings. Okay. Now, we've seen all along that our physical bodies have been evolving along at the same time that the macrocosm of nature has been evolving. And at the same time, the morality, if we go back to Lemurian times when people slashed each other to death and had a fight to the finish or threw each other into volcanic fires, those were considered good things because you sensed pain. Whereas most of the time you just floated around not sensing anything. That's a much different kind of religion than the religion that we have now, a religion of being very gentle, very kindly and considerate to others. So we have to look at the evolution of religion, and so we're going to look back at this whole chart again. We said that in the early Saturn period, we developed the will of the divine spirit. And that gave us power. That was billions of years ago when the Earth was no more dense at its maximum. It didn't even exist as the Earth. The shape of the solar cosmos was very indefinite. And that is what gave us power. Then in the Sun period, when the Earth or when the cosmos got as dense as desire, we developed life and light. And finally, back in the old Moon period, we developed the ability to differentiate. This is associated with thinking. This is associated with willing. This is associated with, this is associated with willing, feeling, thinking. Okay. These are things that, if we look at them, you can think of this like a storage battery. It's a black box. It's got all kinds of power in it, but what the nature of that power is, we don't know. It's always invisible to us. And we can think of the life spirit as a light bulb, which, when in union with the divine spirit, throws off light. But when that light projects through the prism of material experience, it gets broken into different wavelengths of color. So the invisible, the dark, black, the power is the Father. The light is the... And this is associated with the Holy Spirit or the human spirit. And this is what our spiritual nature is like. Now, we're talking about evolution of religion. We're saying that these are previous periods. Right now, we're in the very middle of the Earth period. We're in the Mars half of it, not the Mercury half, when we're in Atlantis. And we are in the fourth revolution of 7 revolutions, turning in, within, and out through the different planes of the physical etheric world. And we are in the fourth state of material manifestation, which is called the fourth globe, the Earth globe. And we are within the fourth period of time, which is Atlantis, the fourth epoch. We talked about last week when we talked about the Toltecs and the Rahamdahals and the Tavlatlis and the Turanians and the different Atlantean racial types, and they they all looked almost identical to each other. It was more like the forms were more like looking like a breed than it was like seeing individual humans. We said that there was the fourth of the fourth of the fourth. So we had preceding us, we had Polaris, we had Hyperborea, we had Lemuria, and we have now Atlantis. And this is a microcosm. This is in the Earth period, and preceding all of this was the Saturn, the Sun, and the Moon periods. And what we're trying to say, this whole principle of analogy, like the atom is shaped like a solar system and the solar system is shaped like a galaxy, that each of us is in spirit, is like the divine in spirit. That as above, what is behind all spiritual studies, the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. The whole of everything that came before in our evolution, in the periods when we were mineral-like, when we were plant-like, and when we were animal-like, this all gets repeated over again and again in epochs, and it gets repeated again and again in every experience. And the experience we're talking about now is human becoming. And so, when we were in Polaris and Hyperborea, when we were indifferentiable human likes, we were going through the indifferentiable quality of the Father. It was a dark, we were held together by the power of oneness. And so we say at that time, in early human development, it was the old religion of the Father. Then there came the time in Lemuria when we were stratified. And in that stratification, we stratified in our desire bodies those of us who could throw off all of the animal qualities and become human beings. We were a oneness. It was a pre-raciality race. There was a unity there, but it was distinct. And that distinctness, where we were all bound together by love, was called the old religion of the Son. Sometimes it's referred to in places like the Bible by people who were in the know, like Paul was in the know. It is called the Melchizedek Christianity. Paul refers to it explicitly that we knew continuous life, we knew continuous light, and that we just went on and on in our consciousness. You know that you realize that the Bible is very coded. It's coded, that's the way to think of it. If you have the insight and the understanding, there are denotations that different words have specific things about them that point you to the different states of consciousness in our past evolution. Okay. And finally, as we became differentiated, you remember that when we went all the way back to the numerology at the beginning of this course, we said first there was the absolute, we couldn't talk about it. We called it the great zero. And then there was the possibility of the one, so the one existed, the one is. The one knew itself from what it was not, and that produced two. And the union of those two was the three. And out of that was born, basically the three is the union of the two. The self is as we've been talking about it, is a product of the union of the two. And out of that was born all of the sevens. We went into all of the deep ideas, cosmological ideas. I don't want to go over them again. It's exciting, but it would take us way, way, way too long. See, I'm going to sell all of those tapes yet. I get everybody's curiosity up about it. So we said that there was such a thing of one, two, and from that there was a therefore, and out of that came all of the sevens and all. Once you multiplied the differentiations, so once we had the religion of oneness and a unified oneness that was aware of itself, that was like the two, and then finally we have the differentiations. That is the old. Next time we're probably going to talk about the new religion of Jehovah or the Holy Spirit. But these are associated like with the light being broken into the spectral seven colors. And so those spectral seven colors, when we were tied more to specific given types of form, though that religion or those religions that were Jehovistic in Atlantis were called race religions. That is, each of the Raham-Dahamals had a much different religion because their forms were different. The original Semites had their own religion. The original Turanians or the Akkadians all had their own religions because they were going through that type of experience. In fact, when you have once broken it down, it becomes many, many kinds of religion. Right now, some of the religions that we have are specifically political. You can look at anyone, and they have a race religion consciousness in them because of their political association. It's not based on rationality. It's not based on insight. A lot of people just do something out of the desire body, human spirit quality of a race religion identified with a Jehovistic separation, and you know what I'm talking about, the irrational, non-rational qualities that are associated with political association. So all of history, even the new race religions in the post-Atlantean times, which we're going to talk about next week, all of the race religions, there's a lot in history that you can see. You know, like some race religions, like some peoples were associated with Venus, and some peoples were associated with Mercury. And like the Egyptians, for example, were primarily associated with Mercury, and that became the center of their whole religion. And even in the ancient times, if you read people like Plato's Socrates, or if you read Herodotus, or if you look at very, very ancient cultures like India, there still are cults, and there still are cults that are associated with certain parts of the country where people worship a certain god. And that god has a flavor that is distinctly part of their culture. It's actually physically part of them because it's part of the breath that they breathe. And these race religions were to take the people as they were going through the various types of separative existence, as they were being, you know, like to be born as a Turanian, meant to have a certain, you were meant to have a certain type of physical experience. We talked about that a lot last week, how there was a general trend in the experience from early Atlantis to late Atlantis, that the forms changed in a certain way, that the consciousness changed in a certain way, and that as you went along, as you went through each of these forms, like a plant when it is just a shoot, or a plant when it is leafing, or when some of those leaves specialize in its flowering, it's still the same plant. But when some of them were in like the flowering state, a specific religion was there to, in a specific way, bring closer this union of the spirit with the personality, the individuality and the personality being brought together in a union. In fact, if you look very carefully at the mytho-histories of all of these people, all of the people even claim that their forebears were descendants of the gods. Meaning to say that all of the colors of the rainbow, obviously, all of the sevens are actually divinities themselves. Remember, we said that everything in the cosmos has character, and everything is alive. And everything is related to a specific kind of being. You can't make a shape on the board or give anything a color without drawing in that divine quality. And so various people were literally born of that given kind of divinity, and they were descended from those gods. That's the way they saw things, and that was the reason for those experiences, to see things in a given way. It would, gods would have to lead you into liking to eat sauerbraten and sauerkraut or something like that, because it's and speak with that harsh, cold tongue, with all of the, all right. Obviously, the demands of the divinities and the morality of the different race religions varied. Those who were worshiping ancestors and we had everything based on memories and experiences of their predecessors, they would certainly develop a much different morality than those who were developing a quality of a primitive type of cunning thinking. And the morality, the morality of memory is going to be different than the morality of thought, because with the morality of thought, you're responsible for being able to figure out what the consequences of your deeds are and what that means to yourself and what that means to the whole. Whereas if you're doing something by memory, you have a sensation or you have something within yourself from past experiences that your conduct has to match up to. So the morality it varies with the different kinds of evolutions. Now you also see in this is actually in nature, because like they had gods of landscapes. It's true that you can look with the clairvoyant eye and you can see various angelic and archangelic divinities that interpenetrate a mountain or a plain or something like that. And in one way that is a god of a landscape. But in another way, that is a representation of the consciousness that is evolving through that mountain, and people who are associated with the earth in a given place, because like we talked about, the early Atlanteans lived down in the basins of what are now the oceans because they needed that warmth that was still coming out of the earth. And therefore the earth was a great divinity to them, and the warmth was a great divinity to them. A lot of these things exist. They've changed in different ways now to becoming things like fire divinities and such like that. They all still exist and still can be seen, but their purpose of evolution was, it was part of nature. It was a part of an interplay with nature, that the experiential side was satisfied as much as the spiritual individualistic side through the given race religions. And so that if you were born in a martial race religion and were drawn to fire, and that was to be your kind of experience, that's what you did. Let's see what we're doing here for time. Because Dale now says we have to be disciplined. We have okay, we've spoken. Oh, we're moving along here really well. It's actually physical more in another way, because remember, we've been talking all along about the very air that we breathe is interpenetrated with the consciousness of a divinity. Like over each whole nationality, even over each whole racial group, even over whole areas of the earth, the whole cosmos is interpenetrated with race spirits, archangels. The Bible talks openly about them. Other holy books also talk about them, that they influence different peoples to go to war against each other to bring them different kinds of experience. And it's such a thing that people who are nationalistically or racially or politically or family-wise associated with a given cult or with a given religion or with a given political system, that is literally right in the air that they breathe. And so, like, we're constantly taking it in as part of the cosmic atmosphere. And when we think that we're free-breathing individuals, we're not. We're being led one way or another. Okay. We have the whole idea, I think, pretty clear now of going from an undifferentiated unity to a differentiated unity, to male and female, to individuals, and then as individuals we consciously collect together, and then when we consciously collect together we form a unity of humanity again, and then we form a complete unity with the cosmos. Something like that is what our whole evolution from past to current to future is like. It starts that we are a nebulous, invisible one. We have no choice but to be one. And then gradually we become a distinct humanity, that we are all fused together in that. And somewhere in there, by our polarization into male and female, we go from being a nebulous one to a unified one to pairs. And the way it came about is out of the pairs, so-called Adam and Eve. When we came into the material world, we identified with our personalities, we shut off the divine, and we became standalone individuals. When this process is carried far enough so that we actually, in our loneliness as standalone individuals, and by our efforts interact with the world and struggle with it, the combination of turning inward from loneliness and turning outward to conquer the world in experience, we awaken. And we produce this awakened concentricity. And then we have the inner union. Instead of it being a union of Adam and Eve, we have an inner union of the higher and lower selves. And finally we have a union with all of humanity, and even more so, an absolute union with the entire divine. And that very, very roughly describes the evolution of religion as human beings. But there are some trends. I want to talk about some of those trends for a little bit, and we may have to, I got this set of notes broken down in such a way that if it gets too long that we can break before we talk about the coming out of Atlantis into the rainbow children. We are children of the rainbow. This is probably the best way to talk about it because some of the words have been so distorted that I don't want to use them at all. But we'll talk about post-Atlanteanism next time. Trends. When we lived in Polaris and Hyperborea and the Lemurian arc of time before the fall, we had no choice of our religion. We were completely guided from without. It's as though the gods, they didn't even have to be that dramatic about it. It's as though the gods guided us by magnetic passes of their hands. They said, do this, we did that. We didn't have the power of our own. We hadn't earned the right to our individual existence yet. We even talked about how in early Lemuria, when the separation of the sexes first occurred, but that we hadn't been too rebellious, how the angels led us on honeymoons. That is, we mated at certain times when we could produce healthy bodies and bodies that would keep us in harmony with the physical evolution. So at that time we were guided completely from without. Then it became necessary for us to become more autonomous. We're becoming more individual. Therefore, we couldn't have complete external guidance, but we had to have some internal guidance. And we said that some of us not only were stratified so that we could have a lower self operating in the desire body, and that this kind of cunning and looking out for self that came from that protected us and brought us our experiences until we could bring the spirit all the way in and make intelligent, with a capital I, decisions and direct our own evolution, that this kind of development in early Atlantis, late Lemuria, we're talking about in terms of millions of years as a good denominator, we're talking about a time when we were led as beginning to be led from within. But some people had developed this more than others. And these are the standout people. And these were standout people that were either divine regents or they were divine teachers. And they, in their own way, compared to the influence that we have on each other, were almost as powerful on their fellow humans as the gods were when they directed us from without. But the first divine regents and the first divine teachers were humans, but they were not earthly. I won't go much into it, but we've talked a long time ago, how it is possible, in a not completely self-conscious way, to not get the grasp of evolution and to straggle. We said that things like starfish are stragglers in our animal kingdom from a previous plant-like state that didn't quite make it, and when they came into the animal existence, that they were a straggler from a previous kind of existence. And it is possible to have that happen, that there is straggling. But that doesn't happen only to the human beings associated with the earth. It happened also to the human beings that were associated with Venus and Mercury. So like Eric von Daniken and all of those people who talk about, Velikovsky talking about people coming here from Venus and Mercury, they put it in a modern context, which is not correct. They put it in terms of spacecraft and machines and things like that, rather than realizing that this can be brought about by other means of transportation through the inner worlds. The Venusians, though they were stragglers from the evolution that was focused on Venus, were much more highly evolved than us because they hadn't fallen, but not so far removed that they couldn't interact with us and become like us. And these people interbred with us. And remember, we talked about genetic abilities, that in Atlantis people could pass things on genetically from parent to child, and that they could carry things on, not only powers but memories, and the essence of previous deeds of ancestors could be passed along. And a lot of this was begun by the Venusians as divine regents. And if you understand it, if you're losing the clairvoyance and you can't see the gods, because as we became more outward and the spirit became more indwelling, and we were falling more and more into matter, we began to lose the clairvoyance. So it only makes sense that you should have a leader that has all the power of the gods, which you're not being able to see much anymore, that you would have divine rulers that could rule you, and that you could realize that they had powers that you didn't have. And so the Venusians and the Mercurians came here and did catch-up work by being the divine regents, and in the case of the Mercurians, becoming the divine teachers and starting the mystery schools. And there are still all those legends that go back to when people had lumps on their head that they were the Mercurians and that they were... I don't know what of it is true and what of it isn't true. The principle is that there was something that was closer to us, that was more visible to us, but yet potent enough to rule us, to guide us. And so there was that trend to this. Obviously, when we talk about the middle part of Atlantis, when we were talking about the terrible kinds of black magic and such like that, it went to being ruled by tyrants, not just in the sense of a Stalin, or I'll just pass on some of the modern, or a Hitler or somebody like that. These were real tyrants. They had magical influence and kept their subjects almost like animals under their magical abilities. And this caused even more a separation between people. They were not manifesting divine powers, and they certainly weren't benign, and it became everyone for oneself. And eventually, as we evolved the consciousness so that we could begin to think and determine the nature between cause and consequence, then we could have a more cause and consequential kind of religion. It's something that had more individuality. And then it became, and for many people it is just becoming that now, I'd say for a lot of people it's just becoming that now, a religion where each one is a law unto self. Okay, we're going to talk more about this all the time. Let's look at paralleling. This is talking about the whole thing of bringing things from being without to being things within, so that we become concentric. Let's look now at the physical education. Out here it was all, from Lemuria into Atlantis, it was all sensation. How much time do we have left, Dale?
1 hour, 16 minutes.
Okay, we're going to have to break at that break point. All right, this was sensation, and eventually sensation leading to rudimentary feelings. And from there, it led to the impression of feelings as memory. And from memory, it led to a memory of feelings led to pain, pleasure, consciousness. And finally, it led then to a cunning thought, how to rudely satisfy pain, pleasures, and finally it leads to objective thinking. And self-consciousness. This is roughly following along in time from late Lemuria through late Atlantis. Some of it is still going on because, it's like a wave. The whole wave doesn't hit all at once. Part of the wave hits and another part hits, it comes like that. That's the way all of our evolution of consciousness goes on. This is just the psychophysical kind of evolution of religion according to the way our bodies were evolving. We could only understand certain things. So this leads to different kinds of consciousness, different kinds of work. I want to make very careful that I differentiate this. I'm going to use my notes directly. During this whole period, we were building organs. And we were building senses. Here, we were building organs, but our etheric bodies, which were associated with the inner worlds, were not so strongly connected. And as a consequence, we had a loose connection. And that loose connection is what made for all of the memory. It was like you were out of your body and you could be into the etheric memory and you could do things by the etheric memory. All of the pain and pleasure brought in the etheric body Now, with the etheric comes all of the higher vehicles. The desire body and the developing mind, what we would call the soul nature, comes with it into the physical body. And then we talked about here the development of lungs, the breathing. When the race spirits were really strong, we said this is the time when the Atlanteans were most cruel and they were eating the most animal food, the most flesh food. And we said that in order to evolve, because we were still living in the different types of fogs of Atlantis, 2 different kinds of fogs, we still breathe through gills, and in order to breathe clear, fresh air and to see the world objectively, clearly outside of ourselves, we had to have the ability to breathe fresh air. And therefore, the eating of flesh food, we were led to do that. If you look in the Bible, there's a very clear set of generations. Who is this called yet? The mighty hunter. Who was the hunter? One was a gardener. One was an agriculturist. They talk about the generations that come after Cain. Oh boy. The generations. One was an agriculturist. One was somebody who produced milk animals for bringing in the etheric stuff with the milk. And then who was a mighty? Dale, do you remember? You remember the Bible all inside out, coming from a strongly religious family. No, I forget it now. And that was the time when humans were, because they had already become cruel and violent, it was necessary to build the soft tissue. And the soft tissue of the lungs is built by taking in a lot of albumin, a lot of protein. And so people ate animals, and eating the animals built in the lungs. And with that, lung breathing is altogether different than gill breathing. We have the whole principle of oxygenation, carbonation, and when you start breathing, you have alternation of thought. And so the whole thinking process was accomplished objectively, especially even in our times. This is going on yet with people eating all of the phosphorus from eating fish. In our times, that they developed the ability to think in the body. Now, mind you, we're talking about the Earth period of being in 2 halves, the Mars half and the Mercury half. We talked a while back about how Mars, in its half of the evolution, polarized the iron and brought about that sensitive state of oxygenation and carbonation so that we could have warm red blood. And when the body reaches a certain temperature, then it is possible for the whole spirit to indwell in it. The spirit cannot dwell in a cold-blooded thing. So when all of our warmth came from without, from the Atlantean basins, when all of our religion came from without, from the gods, we weren't warm-blooded creatures yet. And so that by the fire of the Mars polarization of the iron in the earth and the development of the iron within our body as a sensitive mechanism to burn the oxygen, we became waking self-conscious people. We became egotistically so. And so this is why it says in the Bible that there is one breath of life. That the life of the Spirit, as it was manifest, coming in with the etheric body and coming in through the breathing mechanism, the 2 were brought together. The word inspiration means the drawing in of spirit, or the same word for breath is the same word for spirit in Hebrew. It's called nephesh. And so we're producing here a more clear consciousness inside of ourselves. We're producing a more clear consciousness outside of ourselves, because in precipitating concrete thought, we're precipitating the fog of Atlantis by 3 different floods. And as that happened, the oceans are forming. We're becoming air-breathing creatures, and only the last flood was an inundation, and that was the one of Poseidonus in the Atlantic. All of the other ones were like the floods of Noah, the floods of raining. The earth was cooling down, or at least the crust of the earth was cooling down. The inside may even be getting hotter. I believe that's a great likelihood. Even physicists are beginning to believe that same thing now. And what was happening is that there is a place in the etheric body when it becomes completely concentric, that is at the root of the nose, that it is like a vacuous spot. And when we come into our bodies, like if it's too hot in our bodies, we say, well, you lose your head. Somebody's hot-headed, they lose their head. Or you fall asleep if you get too cold. There's a specific temperature for us to live ego-consciously in our bodies. And when we are perfectly in our bodies, and as the religions brought us along, and as we physically brought along, when the etheric body was perfectly concentric with the physical, then that spot was concentric. It's at the root of the nose, and in that, the silent watcher, the virgin spirit, as para-ego, exists, and it was possible to see the glories of the external world. And that is, all along, we were huge, big beings in Atlantis, late Lemuria, and as we became smaller and smaller, and as we became more focused into ourselves, we woke up. This is a wonderful experience. I don't know how to say it. We'll talk a little bit more about it next time. So the trend number 3 that we're looking at is a trend of consciousness. First we were unconscious in our guidance to experience. Then we had consciousness that was based on deep sensation and memory. And from that, we began to get a continuity. When sensation wakes us up to our body existence as individual personalities. And at the same time that the spirit is coming into this awakening personality, it gets waked up to this reality. And so sensation leads us to know that we're there. To some extent, the martial things still play to this day. Like when people wore armor, if you wear tight clothing, that's very martial. You know that you're there in a personal sense. In some ways, wearing tight clothing, you're too physically conscious. But then you know that you're there, and then you associate that with memory, and you begin to get a continuity of self. And with that continuity of self in relation to senses, you develop a consciousness of like and dislike, which eventually turns up to the consciousness that we have now of good and good in the making, or good and evil, or things that we're attracted to, or things that we are repulsed from. And finally, that you recognize here that when you have the first religion is a religion of sensation, then it is a religion of pain, and then it is a religion of fear. There are still parts in the Bible yet that talk about to know God, you must fear God. What is it? The fear is the birth of the belief in God. I forget the exact passage. And after we become to have the pleasure, pain, like, dislike, then we have avoidance religions, and then we have a religion of reward. So instead of being motivated by fear, the way that we're moved on forward is, well, I'll give you a reward. And then finally, the reward is seen in terms of a legal consciousness. Laws are laid down. If I do this, this will happen when cunning starts to come in. All right, we'll carry this on further the next time. We're going to talk next time about the Moses story, which is really not a story of Israel. It's a story of Atlantis, and we're going to talk about the migration out of Atlantis. And we're going to make it all the way through our own times next time, because I want to move a little faster so we aren't going too far into June. I don't know if we'll actually go that long, but it might be that long. And that's it.